All right, thank you, Eric. Hey, good evening, Michael Spoor. Tonight I'll do a presentation for you on realistic passenger train operations for model railroads. This is a topic people have asked me to do for probably 10 years. So I'm finally getting around to doing it. So this will mainly focus on model train operations. It will not focus on designing a layout or a prototype passenger trains. So it's primarily just on doing passenger train operations for your model railroad. Right, these are some of the people who helped me with this presentation, or they let me use photos of their layouts. So some of these people are definitely more knowledgeable on passenger train operations than I am. So this presentation is some of the ideas and tricks that I have used and these people have used. You can use other ideas for your layout. These are just some of the things we have used to help do passenger train operations on our layouts. Right, just some key points before I start. The most important thing is to have the passenger trains on your layout follow a schedule and use the fast clock. And I'll go over these more later. And the next is having a working coach yard will greatly enhance passenger operations on your layout. If you have space to do a coach yard and whatever model had one in real life, this will greatly make passenger operations more interesting in your layout. And so the passenger trains in your layout aren't just going from staging to staging with nothing in between. And also for your coach yard, just make sure you have switchers in your coach yard and the engines that pull your mainline passenger trains, which actually can pull these cars. Many switchers these days from manufacturers have very minimal pulling power. So before you do this, make sure the engines you use can actually pull the cars you plan on running. The next one is just making sure your passenger equipment runs well. Many Walters and most brass passenger cars out of the box do not run well at all. I'll give you some tips and ideas on how to make these cars run well in your layout and hopefully not derail constantly. And also, if you want to do car cards, waybills, switch list for your coach yard or passenger cars, I would highly recommend you do these on a computer or a typewriter and you don't handwrite them. I've been to some layouts where they handwrote them. Their handwriting was so horrible. I had absolutely no idea what the switch list even said. And also, you don't need to do switch lists or car cars and waybills. You can just choose which you want to do. For my coach yard, I use switch lists. And for some of the trains and cars, I use waybills. But you don't need to use waybills for most of your trains or any of your trains. That is entirely up to you. Okay, first I'll start with some references. These are some references that can help you set up like realistic passenger train operations on your layout. The left is the official passenger equipment register. Most people know that there are freight equipment registers, which list the freight cars by year and railroad, but there are also ones for passenger trains. To my knowledge, these stopped once Amtrak started, but I could be wrong. But I have one of these for probably 15 different years from the 40s through by the late 60s. The middle, I model the Chicago. So if you can find a rule book for the station you model, that will greatly help and make your operations more realistic. I base some of what I do for Chicago Union Station based off of the actual rule book for Chicago Union Station, which helps. And also on the right, if you model a large enough station or a popular station, there could be books written about that station itself. Ed DeRuin wrote a very good book on Chicago Union Station, its history, and how the operations were there. He also includes diagrams of the yards and a lot of passenger consists for the trains that went there. So say if you model a larger station, you might be able to find a book written about the station that you model. This is just a list of some of the timetables. Say I model Chicago, so I included a BNSF Metro one for the line. And the middle is the CB&Q version from 1959, which lists all the suburban trains or dinkies that operate on the line. And then the right is the CB&Q employee timetable for the year that I model. The many railroads and employee timetables, they list, all the passenger trains, when they ran, etc. But also in at least the CB&Q ones, it gives the speed limits of the line and the speed limit of the train and how fast it took the train to go between the stations. And it even gives the average miles per hour of the trains. So between Chicago and Aurora, it'll tell me the average mile per hour of the trains that ran on that line, which certainly could be helpful. It'll also, if you want realistic operations, your train should be going the realistic speeds that they ran. So if you have the employee timetable or some other things, they'll tell you, how fast your train should be running on your railroad. This is just some more modern, Amtrak timetables. In Amtrak, you used to be able to pick up paper ones in the actual stations. Now they're PDFs from their website. These are just some from the 90s. So the Sunset Limited, then the California Zephyr, and then the Texas Eagle. Then the California Zephyr in the 90s was interesting because the consist was different per day of the week and sometimes per year. Some days they would add the cars for the Pioneer and Desert Wind, and some days they wouldn't. So depending what day you model or what year you model, the consist for the train could be almost double the length of another day. And on the right, sometimes Amtrak would publish like a year guide, and this gives you the schedule or timetable for every Amtrak train. So if you don't want to collect 20 different paper timetables or PDFs, you can just get one book which lists all of them, which is helpful. And all of these you can readily find on eBay from what I've seen. So this one key thing is, if you're running passenger trains, you should try to stick to the real schedule as soon as you as close as you can. And I'll talk more about that on other slides. These are some other guides that can help. These are for Metra and BNSF. The left is the operations profile that Metra and BNSF produces. They had several of these over their time. And this book gives you the track plan for the line. It gives you some of the rules for the line for the engineers and conductors. And it also, as in some other ones talked about, it gives you the speed limits for the trains on the line. And this also gives you the speed limits for the freight trains on the line. And on the right side, many commuter railroads will have these. This is the book the engineers on the BNSF/Metra line will use to qualify to run on that line. Pretty much everything you want to know about that line is in that book, including details about the engines and everything. So if you can find an engineer or conductor who worked on the line you model, or even on eBay, you might be able to find a book like that. Say that book gives me pretty much everything I need to know about Metra operations on the BNSF, former BN, former CB&Q line, including like diagrams of the passenger cars and engines. So one of the most important things of passenger train operations is obviously running accurate trains with accurate consists. There are many places you can find this information. I'll just give you a few of them. One of the easiest and most obvious ways is from the manufacturer itself. Many plastic or brass manufacturers produce passenger trains, like right on their website or in the train cars itself. They'll give you consists for various years. This is just one of the ones I took from the Walters website. It's the 1960s version of Penske's General. And if you just go to their website, they give you, a couple consists for various years. Then the box sets, they do that also. So this is some other references for consists. There have been some books over the years that list consists of various trains. On the left is one of these. That publisher, I think, did 3 different books of passenger train consists from the 1940s to the 1970s. In that book, it's just listed by railroad, and then they list some of the trains and then consists in there. And the right side is another book by Ed DeRuin. If you want to know about moving mail and express cars, he has tons upon tons of consists of mail and express trains in that book for various eras, for various railroads. So that book is very helpful. And also in the bottom, I just put probably the best place to find consists is just some of the online groups or forums. If you say, I want to know about some random passenger train in the consist for a specific year, somebody probably will respond back in the near future with that information. To my computer, I've saved hundreds of like various passenger train consists over the years. So if I'm doing a train or a new train, I'll just pull up one of those documents and look at it. Okay, so once you come up with the consist for your train and the equipment, the first thing you should do, or one of the first things you should do, is acquire a fast clock and then set it up. If you want to run passenger trains to a set schedule, that won't be possible without a fast clock. Now, if you want to set it to 4 to 1, 6 to 1, 8 to 1, that's up to you. But if you want to run trains to a set schedule, you need a fast clock. Okay, the next thing is this, the actual train cards you use. You can do this any way you want. These are just some of the examples that I've done. On the left side, I took the Metra BN timetable that they give you. In the middle, I blanked out, and I just put my railroad information with the trains that I'm running. So I thought that looked nice. I used like the real timetable they give you. And then just in the middle, I put my own information for the trains. And the right side are some of the CB&Q ones that I use for when I do 1959 operating sessions. They say, however you do it is up to you, but obviously you need the train information and then the stations, and then when you leave those stations, and then when you arrive at your destination. Right. This slide just shows a way of setting that up. When the trains leave their stations, you should always try to use the real times that the trains left those stations. And then for the remaining ones, you should try to keep those times as close to the real times as possible. However, it's likely not possible to do that on a model railroad unless you have a gigantic railroad. So what I have done, what I suggest, is just take the train you want to run, then run it on your layout, then this, take a stopwatch, your phone, this time, how long it takes to go between those locations. And then you can do that for the fast clock that you use. So if you want to run 4 to 1 or 6 to 1, this time that train, how long it takes to go between the stations on your layout to 4 to 1 and 6 to 1. Then once you do that, you can make a more feasible schedule for the trains on your layout. So if you use the actual times for the trains, you might be sitting at a station for 30 minutes in real time. And if you're on a layout, you probably don't have time for that. So this before you start running operating sessions at the passenger trains, just make sure you mess with the schedule to make sure it works and it's feasible for your layout. So I'll just briefly go over some parts of your layout that will be helpful. That's one of the big things is having a coach yard. This is obvious if what you're modeling had a coach yard, and if you have the space on your layout to do a coach yard. So this is just the Chicago Union Station. Obviously, this is likely too large for a layout, but it's just a good example of showing how some coach yards are arranged. Say on the bottom is the present day Metro coach yard. They're split into 2 coach yards. Then you have the engine service facility, which in the Q days was the Zephyr pit. And above that is the present day Amtrak coach yard. And on the right, just beyond the St. Charles Airline, is the engine facility for Amtrak. Before Amtrak, this is Penn Central and then Pennsy. Just having a coach yard gives more realism to your layout, and then gives your passenger trains more of a purpose and more of a switching opportunities. To me, if you're running passenger trains, you don't just want to have them running from, staging yard to staging yard. If you have freight yards and you're switching freight cars, you should also be doing that with your passenger cars to make it, more interesting. It's another thing you can do is just have a storage, like an outdoor storage yard. This is from the Virginia Railway Express and Broad Run. This is the end of that line. This is directly next to the Manassas Airport. But in Mall Railroad, this works well. This is similar to like open staging, like what David Barrow did in his Cat Mountain. So you don't need hidden staging for, commuter trains. You can actually have, open staging on your layout. And these are usually much smaller than coach yards. It's not going to be 30 tracks long or something. This is something you could feasibly do with open staging on your layout, or even like slightly going into the aisle. So you just have the commuter trains go in here and then they go back like later in the day or at night. They don't park here overnight. And just beyond the parking lot there, you can see where the Broad Run station is. So in real life, this is an easy spot to go to and a busy spot. So you have the Norfolk Southern Main directly next to it. And then the Manassas Airport is directly, to the right by that field there. So this is just another example of a storage yard. This is the Metro one in Elburn, Illinois. This is on the C&W line, now the UP line. And this was opened in, I think, 2006. So this is a more modern creation, but this is just another good example of how you can have an open staging yard as a storage yard for your layout. And as you can see, this is not gigantic, so you can easily do this in HO scale on your layout. You don't need a 30-track staging yard for your commuter trains to run on. This is that's a track plan of this one idea. This is from Chuck Hitchcock's first, the layout he had, the Argentine passenger layout. This is just a one way you can do, showing some of the various buildings you can add, and then the smaller coach yard on the bottom. So in the top, he had the REA building, which had 4 tracks into it, and the commissary building, and then the post office. If you have enough space, adding REA building, commissary, and post office will add a lot of extra switching for your layout. So in addition to having a coach yard, then the cars, some of the cars in the coach yard will then go to the REA building, the commissary, and the post office. And some express reefers also have to be iced. He included an icing track, which you can see in the middle. Then he also had the overflow express track. In Chicago at the REA building, there also was a bunch of overflow tracks for the REA building. So if you have the space, you should add as much of the prototype building as possible to give you more switching opportunities. So most people have freight yards with locals and stuff like that. With passenger train operations, you can do the same thing also with passenger trains. There's a lot of people just don't think of that, or maybe don't think they have the space for that. But most of those buildings you can make background buildings or just backdrop buildings just to give you more switching to do. Okay, this is an example. This is a coach yard. This is my coach yard on the layout. One obvious key thing for a coach yard is that the coach yard has to be big enough to store the passenger trains, which will be running on your layout. So that obviously means it would have to be larger than normal, but if people have large freight yards on your layout, you could also have a large coach yard on your layout. So all the passenger trains that I run, go through this coach yard and then go into Chicago Union Station. So you're going to see it's 6 tracks long, and then the 2 mainline tracks are in the back beyond it. And then on the right, there's curves to go through Canal Street and then to the rest of the layout. Then, in real life, the other side of the wall would be where the Pennsy and later Amtrak coach yards are. However, you need a gigantic layout or a more open space to model both coach yards. So in this layout, it only covers the CB&Q, later BN, and then Metro coach yards. This shows the other end of it. This is the Zephyr pit where the engines are stored. For operating sessions, this is mainly a two-position job. You'll have the coach yard switcher who switches the trains. So when he makes the trains in the coach yard and he backs them into Chicago Union Station, then I will then back the engines onto the trains. Then in reverse, when the train arrives, I'll pull the engines, bring them into the Zephyr pit or engine facility. And then the coach yard switcher will grab the cars, then bring them into the coach yard, and then split them up either for the next train or just have them sit if they run later on. This area is also where I do most of my engine maintenance between operating sessions. So when I do like consisting, speed matching, just cleaning engines, I'll bring them all to this area. So that's why I see like a wide variety of engines in here where I put them on the side. If you have a larger coach yard or even a smaller one, just having that be a two-man job will greatly help you. It could be overwhelming or you run out of time if one person has to do everything. So if you can just come up with some way of splitting those duties, that will help you. That's what I said. For me, I just have one guy who does the switching, then the other guy who's usually me, who's the yard master in charge of what tracks the train's going on, and then moving the engines from the engine facility to the actual trains themselves. And say the hole in the wall is where it goes from the coach yard to the actual Chicago Union Station, which is staging. Eventually, I'll do scenery in this area, but for now, that's not a big priority. Say another position we can do that some stations have is a tower position. The arrow in this photo goes to the Harrison Street Tower at Chicago Union Station. So on your layout, you could have one guy who works the coach yard and does the switching between the REA tracks and that. And the other guy, you could have him be inside the tower or pretend to be in the tower. And his job is to control all trains going into the passenger station and then, what tracks they go on and then moving, so I do the engines to and from. So you can do the jobs however you want, but I would definitely suggest breaking up the jobs to at least two people and having something similar to a tower position on your layout. And this photo I also like, 'cause it shows, 3 different trains going between, the various coach yards and, the Chicago Union Station tracks. On the front, you have a Q Jeep 7 switching what looks like the North Coast Limited. The middle one, you have a Q switcher. It's like it's going some of the Mail and Express cars. And then on the right, you have one of the GM&O trains going to the Chicago Union Station tracks. So if you have a big enough space, you could have multiple switch jobs and trains going in and out of the station at the same time. I also like this photo because it shows that you had engines other than switchers switching these sometimes. So here in the mid-60s, the Q started to use Jeep 7s switching Chicago Union Station. This was around the same time that they started to retire the VO 1000s. And most of those ended up being sold to the Atlantic coastline. As later on, I'll go more on engines, which you can use and how to let's make them run better. Okay, so this is showing some of the facilities you can have. Like previously I talked about REA buildings, but to say the more switching you can add, the more interesting your passenger train operations will be. And that's obviously if you have the space to do so. But this is a good photo showing the REA facility at Chicago Union Station. So it enters through the door there, and the door obviously opens or closes to the inside of the facility. And behind it, you have some of the excess storage area for the REA cars going in there. Say this would be a good building to have on the back wall of your layout or something similar to that. Say this is just a good photo showing what the inside looks like from the view outside. So you just have the 2 tracks going inside. So you could have this on the wall of your layout going into a staging area or somewhere like off the layout, we could just store a bunch of, mail and express cars going into an REA facility. Okay, this is an example of an REA facility. This is on Rob Bittison's layout. This is at his Denver station. See, I thought this is a very good model of a show how to do an REA station. And also I like how it's basically its own inlet. So it goes in the back, so you can store more cars in there. And this structure is similar to the one on Chuck Hitchcock's first layout. They look very similar. So he just added like an extra cubby there, and that's just a great switching opportunity. If we have the Denver switchers to use, just give you just more switching. This is just a prototype photo I used from Houston. This is just another type of REA facility. In the back of the photo, you can see the REA facility for Houston. This one is different though, in that the cars did not go to the facility. You can see there's some like hand carts and stuff in front of it. The REA stuff moved by hand cart from the REA building to the actual cars themselves, which would be on the left on the station tracks. So this REA building would just be a background or backdrop building on your layout. So you can still add an REA building on your layout, even if you don't have space. You can just have it on the wall of your layout. I also thought this is good because it shows that not every REA facility worked the same. Some giant places like Chicago had large REA buildings. Even some the smaller ones, the REA buildings, the stuff they move by hand carts or just by hand to the tracks. As you see in the back left of the photo, that's the actual building for the TNNO's Grand Central Station in Houston. Sadly, they demolished this building in 1960, and they built a shed, which is now the Amshack for Houston. So Houston, for the SP side, used to have a very large and nice building, and they demolished it for the junky Amshack you have now. And to the left of that in real life was the post office building. The post office building in Houston did have baggage cars going there to be loaded. So on the same station, you got an REA facility and a post office facility, but both operated in different means. And on the bottom, if you just go left in real life, that's where the coach yard was. It was a fairly small coach yard. So even a coach yard in a layout, you don't need 50 tracks. Even in a larger city like Houston, the coach yard is still fairly smaller, and it can easily be modeled in HO or N scale. This is an example of a post office annex building you can build, or a post office facility. This is from Bob Barnett's layout in Texas for his St. Louis station. So this is a good example. If you can have space, you can have an REA facility and a post office facility in your layout, or you can just have one. But just having buildings like this gives you more switching opportunities on your layout. So if you want to have more than just the trains going to the stations, you can have the cars going between two various buildings from the coach yard. So to me, the more switching you have, the better it is. And this is the same facility on Bob's layout, just from a different side. I say this building isn't 50 feet long. It's something you could easily model on your layout and have 3 or 4 cars going to there. And those 3 or 4 cars going to there will add a lot of switching potential to your layout. So yeah, I just threw this in. You don't need to model Chicago or New York or LA to have like stations with switching. You can model like stations on the stations in between the lines. So this is the Galesburg station in Illinois, and this is showing a switcher switching one of the trains there. I mean, a photo, this looks like it's the switcher separating the Nebraska Zephyr and Colorado and in Galesburg. Between Chicago and Galesburg, the Nebraska Zephyr and Colorado were merged starting in 1958. A lot of people go to IRM and they think that's how the consist always was, but for a lot of the CB&Q era, the Nebraska Zephyr is actually merged with the Colorado, and So you have a bazillion head-end cars in front of the Nebraska Zephyr consist. And in Galesburg, you could have a switcher separating the two consists. And Galesburg also had a REA facility. So if you don't have the space to model Chicago or New York or something, you can still have a lot of like switching or station potential at stations elsewhere. Okay, these are just some of there's some ideas for like consists for the trains, for like the coach yard or the train itself. These are two of the ones I use. Just on the left, this is just the consist for the coach yard switcher. So when he makes all the trains, just to shows him the consist for the train. So it shows the train number, the date of the op session, the train name, the departure time of the train, the engines will be on the train, and then the cars on the train by the car number and type. And if the car comes from another train, I just highlight that or just put it in red or something. So it shows what cars you're going to be waiting for and then what trains those cars come from. So you can plan out in advance, your switching jobs. You'll know, well, when train 56 comes in, you'll need to steal 3 of those cars to put on the Kansas City Zephyr. And the right side is the engine assignments for these trains. So you'll know in advance what engines to put in what trains, so you can preemptively have those engines ready. Once the coach yard guy puts the cars in the station, you can then move these engines and couple onto those. As you can see, some on the right, it shows where the engines are at the beginning of the session and what trains they go on. And many of these engines are reused for trains, especially the commuter trains or dinkies. But I break it up by the inbound trains and outbound trains and what engines are on those trains, which greatly helps if you're on like a set schedule and time. So that just makes it easier for you to know how to set up the trains. These are just some more ideas of like consists and switch lists. These are the ones that Keith Jordan used on his layout. So he based these off of prototype nickel plate paperwork, which he has. And if you go on eBay, many other railroads used very similar paperwork to this. It doesn't have to be nickel plate, but basically Keith combined these two forms into the form you see on the left, which is used for the coach yard and also for the conductor of the train himself. One key thing that I like in this in the bottom is it gives the AR designations of all passenger cars. Most people know AR designations of freight cars, but not as many people know that for passenger cars. So this will definitely help like remind you what is what, especially if you're working a coach yard. And one common thing I see is people will put BX for box cars for their freight car, like car cars and waybills. But if you see BX is actually an express box car. So if you're running passenger train and freight train operations, you need to make sure you're not using duplicate AR designations and you're using the correct AR designations. That said, I've seen many similar ones to these on eBay or at train shows. So you can just find the paperwork that looks good to you, then just make your own consist based off of that. These are some other ones used. The left is the ones that Rob Biddison uses for his Denver facility. So it says the date at the top, the train order number, the train number, the name of the train, where it terminates, and then it has the cars in the train and the cars to be removed. So that's just another way of doing consists for your coach yard. And the right is one I did for the BNSF Metra era. That's right. Again, I took the real timetables that Metra gives you. I blanked out the middle, and then this came up with my own for the train consist. And this is what the coach yard uses for the various dinky commuter ones. This whatever you use, just make sure the consist or switch list has the train number, the date, the time the train leaves, and then obviously the passenger cars, what the correct order for them, and then what type of cars they are. You can include the engine or not if you want, but if you include the engine, then obviously that engine would have to run on that train. So you could just leave that blank if you don't have assigned engines per specific trains. But again, this is all up to you. These are just like ideas and ways people have done this. These are just some other ones. This is what Al Partlow uses on his Houston Grand Central Station for the switch list. So it states the train number, the date, the train name, when the train leaves, the engines, then the cars in order, then what type of cars they are, the car number, and then the description. So it gives you the AR designation and then what that is. So BX and then express boxcar. So based off that switch list, you should be able to easily find the cars in the coach yard and put them in the correct order. And the right side is just another one that Al uses on his layout. Okay, I'm just going to briefly go over some the real railroad paperwork. You can use these if you want or not. This is just showing just what some of the real railroads use. And the left was what BN used for conductors with the report of passenger load count. So you can use this if you want for the conductor of trains. Just you would have to write down the train number, arriving station, the date. Then below that's the cars on the train. Then you write how many passengers or revenue passengers, non-revenue passengers, and if there's groups. Now you could have your conductors do this if you want. Maybe you don't have time for them to do that, but this is another like idea of paperwork you can do. Say on the right is one that NJ Transit uses, and I've seen similar ones for Metra or others. This is this listing what the conductor used, mainly for listing defects or errors or delays. So in the middle it says like explanation of delays. So if your train is delayed by 20 minutes for some reason, you'd write the time delayed and then the explanation of why it was delayed. And then below that, if there are any defects or issues with any of the cars on your train, you would write what car number it was, the defect, and then the person who would be working on that. And the bottom is the same thing for engines. So if there's some issue with the engine, the engineer is on, you would put that for there when you came back into the terminal. So you could mess with that form to make it work better on a model railroad, or you could just use that yourself. But these are some ideas of real paperwork that railroads use for passenger train operations. I'll just briefly go over waybills. You can use waybills for your cars if you want or not. I generally only use waybills for cars that have to be switched to an REA facility or a mail facility or something like that. So like the California Zephyr or North Coast Limited, where cars aren't going off to like REA or facilities like that, I don't have waybills, but these are some examples of waybills formats which you can use. This shows it like on the left. It's going to the post office in Creston, Iowa. Came from Train 29, which is the fast mail. Then it came from the post office in Chicago. Then it just gives the car type for that. And the right, just another one for REA facilities. So this is going to the REA facility in Chicago from Train 52. And it's coming from the REA facility in St. Paul. Say if you want to be switching an REA facility or a mail facility, you could use car cards and waybills also if you don't need a switch list, or you can use both. All of that is up to you. These are some more examples of real paperwork. The left is an Amtrak baggage report. This is more just, actual like baggage that people use, but this is just an example to show, other types of real paperwork you could possibly have your, conductor use. You obviously have to simulate like broken locks or loose baggage or lost baggage, but this is just something else fun you could have your conductors doing on a train if you want. And the right side is the CB&Q waybills that they use for cars going to the REA facilities. If you want to have your switch lists or car cards and waybills based off of that one on the right, that's something you could do. I tried to find other railroads like REA waybills, but I didn't find too many. if anyone else has other examples of that, I would definitely like to see them. This is just more real waybills. These are milk waybills. I've seen a lot of these for like New England railroads, and also I've seen them for like UP going towards Chicago from like Omaha. Now this is, these are for the actual cans themselves, not the cars, but you could have your conductor filling these out if you're stopping with, milk cars at various cities, or you could just, change this in a way to be, for an individual milk car itself. I just like finding this paperwork because it shows us some of the various paperwork that railroads used for, passenger train operations. And I know a lot of New England-based railroads, they like having, milk cars and milk trains. This is just an example of one of those. Okay, I'll very briefly go over in the next 2 slides is how to make your equipment run well. I've heard for a long time that people drop a lot of money buying Walters passenger trains or brass passenger trains and just constantly derail. A lot of passenger equipment out of the box will not run well at all. So what I do is, whenever I get a passenger car or a train, I just take it and run it individually on the layout. And if it doesn't derail, then it's good. And if it does derail, then I take the car upside down, then just turn the trucks. And if the trucks hit anything that interferes with the trucks turning, I immediately chop or remove that from the car. I've seen a lot of people buy like brass passenger cars and they say, oh, it constantly derails, there must be some defect. Yes, most brass passenger cars are made for collectors. They're not made to run. So if you want it to run well in your layout, you'll likely have to remove some parts or change the trucks out to make it run well. So earlier this year, I put the Great Northern's Empire Builder in my layout. About half of the cars, I had to do some of these steps to make them run well. So this on the left is some of the steps that I've seen that works to make passenger equipment run better. Adding KD long shank couplers. If you have big diaphragms in your cars, this could be something that helps a lot. Just make sure the cars have the proper weight. A lot of Walters or branch line or other passenger cars are extremely light, especially if you want to run them with brass passenger cars. Brass passenger cars are significantly heavier than Walters passenger cars. So if you want to run them together, you're going to have to add weight to the Walters passenger cars or the branch line cars. For baggage cars, that's fairly easy. You can just remove the roof and add weight in there. But if you want to add weight to cars that have seats, you'll likely have to remove the seats and then put like lead weight in the bottom and then put the seats on top of that. This earlier this year, I made a Walter Santa Fe train for a guy, and every single car I had to add extra weight to the cars to make them run better. On the right is a photo. On Walters cars, this is a huge issue. On Walters cars, the issue is often the truck itself. So if you turn the car upside down and turn the trucks, sometimes the truck itself might be the problem. So the arrow I have, I don't know what the technical name of that part is, but I found a lot of the Walters trucks, that part, the 2 parts that go in the middle will hit things. So I had to chop on all my Walters trucks, I chopped those off. And once I did that, then the trucks would turn freely and not hit anything and not derail. Then below that is this one huge issue. If you're buying new passenger cars, make sure you test the equipment out before you have an operating session. The last thing you want to do is, spend $1 bazillion on a new Walters or brass train set, and then have it derail constantly during your operating session. So just make sure you take the time to fix these cars before you actually run them in an operating session. And then the bottom one, it might be obvious, but make sure the curves on your layout are big enough to actually handle larger passenger cars. On my layout, I usually just test auto racks. Auto racks are about as big a car as you can get. If you can run auto racks and they don't derail, then you'll be good. I think that some people just forget that for some reason, that if you're going to run longer passenger cars and trains, you need wider radius curves. And this is just some more tips. This is a sum of what you have to do for brass cars. Because with a lot of brass passenger cars, they want to put in, the 100% underbody details that every car had. However, when you do that, it often prevents the trucks from turning properly. So in the bottom one, I showed arrows to everything I'd either chop off completely or like sand or file down. So in the bottom, you can see the brake line. The trucks would hit the brake line, which would cause the truck to derail. So I had to remove the end of the brake line. On this car, for some reason, the coupler pocket would be hit by the trucks. So I had to chop off half of the coupler pocket. Then also sometimes you'll have bolsters or other parts in there that you have to like sand down or just chop off completely. This a lot of people for some reason think if you spend $500 in a brass passenger car, it will magically run flawlessly in your layout. That definitely is not the case. I'd say I'm probably 75% of the brass cars I've had to spend 20 to 30 minutes of this messing around with the cars to make sure the truck turns freely. Another thing is making sure your engines run well and the engines actually can pull your cars. That's another key thing is just having KD couplers in all your equipment. And then if you have a coach yard, just, take a switcher you plan on using and then just seeing how many cars it can pull. And the photo is one of the Bowser VO1000s, which I have. It's an incredibly well-detailed engine. However, it has the worst pulling power of any engine I've ever owned in my life. It pulls about a max of 4 passenger cars. So if you plan on, using that engine, you'll have to either add weight to it or you'll have to MU 2 of them together. Now the Q in real life didn't MU those engines together, but on my layout, the only way those engines will pull the passenger trains to and from the coach yard was by MUing 2 of them together. Just if you have engines, just make sure you actually test the engines to see what they can pull. Because most manufacturers make switchers, they usually only test them on freight cars. Passenger cars are obviously significantly heavier than freight cars. So this is just a photo I used to show that larger engines such as Jeeps and RSs were used in coach yards sometimes. So this is just photo proof of a Jeep 7 being used at Chicago Union Station at the REA facility. So if your switchers don't have enough pulling power, you might prototypically be able to use larger engines such as Jeep 7s or Jeep 9s or something. All right. That was a lot of information. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Just if you have any questions on this, if it's on a specific railroad, I probably won't have the answer, but you can ask me questions or just ask Eric questions on this.
Okay. Thanks so much for presenting. Let me go through the comments here. Tom CR is asking, what layout is this? What fast clock ratio have you found works best? Michael, you still there? You're going on mute. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
There was a question about what fast clock ratio have you found that works best, with the understanding that everybody's railroad's different and so on. But
I usually use 4-1, but if things there's a slow period, I'll move it to 6-1. I would just say this basically messed with that. Just run a couple operating things, just see what clock speed works best for you. I don't see the key is that the trains leave on time from the places, but I only do 4-1, but maybe 8-1 works best for you. I think
well,
that's
yeah, if
mainly
you're only doing passenger, otherwise everybody's racing to get their work done.
yeah.
Let's see. Are Keeler, I don't know if that should be Keller, Rail Specialties fast clocks still available? don't know about that, Richard, Castagna. There are fast clocks available. There's a couple different ones. I know there's one that I think a Digitrax tied in. I mean, there's somebody remind me. I can't remember the name of them. There are fast clocks available. I don't know about that particular one. Al is asking, do you model any passenger ops outside of the terminal, such as spotting or picking up passengers at stations along the line? Michael?
Yes, like I run the commuter trains or dinkies, and they stop on several stations throughout the line. And I also have the Aurora station, which sometimes cars would take off there, but that's the main station before you go into staging. So you go to Chicago, some of the commuter stops, and then Aurora is the main station where the trains stop to pick up passengers.
Hello, this is Perry Sugarman. I tried to respond by text, but I wasn't able to do that, or by chat. But Keeler Keeler system rail clocks are not available anymore. After Larry died, there was another fellow whose name I can't get out of my head right now because I'm old. But he stopped. I used to buy those things for myself, where I ran the clock base out of office of PCs. I have a bunch of heads, and I have two more LED 7-segment LEDs that the gentleman sent me the last time I talked to him, and it was way before the pandemic the last time he did anything, so I'm pretty sure that you can't get them anymore commercially. You could probably build them, but anyhow, that was a question asked, and I can answer that one.
Jeff Schultz, thanks. I couldn't remember. It was Logic Rail. That's the main one I see these days. Seth Newman's Model Railroad Control Systems also had one available through Andrew Deek. That's a Wi-Fi tie-in. I dropped the link in the chat. I haven't used it personally, but it might be useful. Let's see. There's a question about, on the layout that you primarily referenced, how many passenger trains run per session and how many operator positions are there?
On the layout, there are about 20 to 25 passenger trains in a session. And engineers, I usually have 7 engineers.
Okay. Iowa Scaled Engineering also has wireless fast clocks. Somebody's asking for your email address. You can drop that in the chat if you want to. There's a comment about some passenger cars with factory installed lighting have very stiff pivoting trucks and wheels that don't roll very freely. He rewired the pickups and installed homemade keep alive circuits. It's a bit of work, but the cars roll very well, and now the lights don't flicker. I have a number of the Rapido passenger cars, which are incredibly detailed, but I've run into the same thing about little bits and things interfering with operation. So I've had to, some of the older ones, I had to trim off some pieces here and there. I'm sure somebody would get upset about that, but it's like, well, sometimes you have to make some adjustments for operations. So, all right. I don't see any more questions. So Michael, again, thank you for presenting. We appreciate it. For everybody else, we'll see you in 2 weeks at our open forum. Be thinking about if you'd like to do a presentation on your own. We've got 2 more slots in 2024. And otherwise, everybody have a nice evening. Thanks for coming.